Well, good evening and welcome to the Kansas City Public Library. I'm Henry Fortunato, Director of Public Affairs. Normally, it's one of my responsibilities to make the introductory remarks at programs like these, but not tonight. I will say very briefly, though, I hope that all of you have a copy of this illustrated monograph written by former Kansas City Star editor Monroe Dodd that explains the extraordinary story of Alvin Sykes and perhaps more significantly tonight, how libraries were key to all of the extraordinary accomplishments that he's been able to achieve over the years. But it's not my role to talk about Alvin tonight. That's going to belong to someone else. And the reason for that is when you read this monograph, you will discover, among other things, that the last time Alvin was in school was in 8th grade. He went to junior high school in Boys Town in Omaha, Nebraska. And as it happens in Kansas City, we have not one accomplished alum from Boys Town, but actually two. That other one would be Jose Faust, noted writer, artist, man about town here in Kansas City, who, as it happens, even went to Boys Town with Alvin Sykes. And so I thought it was appropriate from one Boys Town guy to another that Jose would actually make the formal introduction tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you will, please welcome Jose Faust.
I honestly can say that I don't think I'll ever have an honor as big as this one, because one of the things that happened when you went to Boys Town is that a lot of us that went there, we were there for various reasons. Some of them were not that great. Our parents were kind of terrified of us, I think, and they were trying to find a place for us to be taken care of. In my case, it was Catholic Charities. My mother couldn't handle my brother and I. She was a single mother working 3 jobs, and the best place for us was Boys Town. It was 1968 when I went there. I came across Alvin not too long after I arrived there. We played intramural sports. Needless to say, when you meet Alvin, he's not the greatest physical specimen, but at the same time, my brother and I recently arrived immigrants. We're not the best, shall we say, we weren't the greatest students of the sports we were asked to play. I came from soccer. The next thing I know, we're hitting a baseball with a bat and throwing a ball through a hoop. And I remember one of the first things that we did was intramural basketball. Alvin was on a team. My brother and I are kind of big. We played like it was football. We hurt Alvin and other people. But I went by looking to see if I could find pictures of Alvin. And one of the things about Alvin is that he kind of tends to be Alvin. The way you will see Alvin is the way he was when we were in Boys Town. And I don't think he liked his picture taken a lot. I think that's changed. But I did find one picture of him and it was in the 1970 pylon. And we're on the wrestling team, which is amazing, but Alvin would be here. I wish I had gotten the picture sooner, but I went through like 4 books before I could find the picture of Alvin and I together, and we're both on the wrestling team. And the thing that this is an honor for me, honestly, is that when you're in Boys Town, you kind of develop this complex. You know you're not good enough to be out in society, and you're kind of in Boys Town. It carried a stigma, but for us Boys Town boys, it actually meant a lot to be in Boys Town. We kind of relied a lot on each other. Some of it was rough, some of it was good. But I always remember one thing that happened is if you run into a Boys Town boy after you leave the home, we called it the home, because it was for a lot of us home, you always took great pride if that boy, A, was still alive, B, was doing well. And I have to tell you, when Alvin and I were both in Boys Town, we had different names. I was Joe Faust, now I'm Jose Faust. Alvin Sykes was Alvin Page. And so when Alvin comes to prominence years later after we've left Boys Town, the last time I had seen Alvin was when we were 18. I won't tell you what that was about. But I read about him in the paper. And it had to do with the Harvey case, which is central to a lot of the things that Alvin did. And I don't think I have ever felt as proud to have been associated with Boys Town as I was at that moment, and as I continue to be as I follow the things that Alvin has done. I'm not a person that has a lot of role models. I don't really have hero worship, but in my life, there's only one true real hero I've ever met, and that's the next person that'll come up and speak to you, and that's Alvin Sykes. So please, if you're welcome.
Somebody's left you a message.
Thank you.
Well, we're here tonight with a hometown hero in Alvin Sykes, and obviously from the response you all know that, and it's probably also fair to say a lot of other people in the world know it. We've gotten messages today from Herbie Hancock, who's a good friend of Alvin's, you may talk about tonight. You're setting the mold for others to follow, as you have always done in your life's work to fight for justice for those without a voice. We have messages from Wheeler Parker, who's a cousin of Emmett Till and been a leader in some of what we're going to talk about tonight. From Kristen Clark, the chief of the Civil Rights Division of New York State, the New York State Attorney General's office. Avery Friedman, as some of you have seen on CNN, is a national civil rights attorney, and they're one of their lead analysts of civil rights cases. So Alvin is known nationally, and we're going to talk about some of his national work. He's a hometown hero. We'll talk a little bit about his work here in Kansas City. It's hard to know exactly how to describe Alvin. And when we were working through this project to create the monograph, create this program, maybe create some programs in the library world about this, we were wondering what to call Alvin. Because, well, we actually had a little bit of an argument, didn't we, about what I wanted to call Alvin the activist in residence at the Kansas City Public Library. I thought that would be a unique title, never before in the library world. But Alvin is very proud, as we are very proud. We in the library are very proud, and I think you all are very proud of Alvin's work in the stacks, with the books, which is where an awful lot of this came from. So we did finally decide on Alvin's title as the scholar in residence of the Kansas City Public Library. So we've made this plaque, the Kansas City Public Library, for his tireless work and far-reaching accomplishments in the field of civil rights. The Kansas City Public Library recognizes 2013 and forever scholar in residence Alvin Page Sykes. So here you go, Alvin.
Thank you.
So, but Alvin, I want to take you back to, and take the audience back. This is the Kansas City Public Library, and, we have, I noticed Alvin in the stacks and Alvin in the cafe, Alvin wandering around, and I probably don't need to tell you all that we have a lot of idiosyncratic patrons of the library. We have a lot of people with various levels of intensity about various things, and I wasn't quite sure what Alvin's level of intensity was and what it was about. And he would talk to me periodically, and I'd get a little bit of his story, and I began to realize it was pretty interesting, and I figured I'd better find out what his real story, the whole story was. And he asked me to sit down with him in the cafe one day, and I began to hear about the purpose of his life. There are a lot of people wandering around the library who have intensity, and they look like they might have a purpose, but they don't really. And then there's Alvin, who is a man of great purpose. And I finally began to hear his story. And part of what we're going to do tonight is you're going to hear Alvin's story. And many of you know bits and pieces of it, so this is a chance for you to hear more of it. And he could tell you the whole story himself. We've done one program before with Alvin in which C-SPAN covered it, and it was basically Alvin telling you the story. But one of the reasons we wanted to do this as a conversation, let me put it to you this way, I insisted we do this as a conversation is because I want to tell the story from a slightly different point of view. It's Alvin's story, but it's also a story about the library, libraries generally, not only KC Mo Public Library, the KCK Library, and all libraries, and about the importance of what Thomas Jefferson called enlightenment. I mean, this is really a story about how libraries empower citizens, about how libraries are the people's university, because as you've heard a moment before, Alvin has his 8th grade Boys Town graduation diploma and nothing further than that. His real education is in the Kansas City and Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas Public Library. And as Jefferson said, enlighten the people generally, and tyranny and oppression of the body and mind will vanish like evil spirits at the dawn of the day. Well, Alvin got his enlightenment in the Kansas City Public Library, but more importantly, Alvin's enlightened the rest of us in the way he's gone about what he's gone about and what he's done. And to have, again, as Jefferson said, free and good government, we need the kind of enlightenment that Alvin's found in the Kansas City Public Library. So, having set the stage for you, Alvin and I talking about this in the library cafe, and you know, there are a lot of people who've benefited from their celebrity in various ways. I do think I want to tell you that too. You find a lot of the people that you see, some of these people you see on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News who've made a career out of something, not unlike how Alvin has made a career out of it. And they're probably not meeting in public library cafes, they're meeting in important restaurants, expensive restaurants in Washington. This is a guy who meets in library cafes. Let's just say that. So Alvin, I want to take you back to the important moments that was mentioned by Jose, but it's really the key to your story, which is that moment your friend, Steve Harvey, is killed at Liberty Memorial. Give us some background of that. Tell us the Steve Harvey story. What happened to Steve Harvey and what you did about it? What happened at Liberty Memorial that night?
Well, before I get to that, I wanted to respond to another part of Jose's introduction.
This is not an organized conversation, obviously, you know.
To Jose's introduction, and he showed a picture of me in Boys Town. Until tonight, I forgot that I had been on the wrestling team at Boys Town. And then I thought about it. I wasn't good, and I kept getting thrown around. So a lot of times you have bad memories that just kind of go away. But he showed me the proof, and I remember now, and that was cool. But Steve Harvey. Steve Harvey. Well, let me set up just so you could understand the situation of Steve Harvey and how I got into it. After I came back to Boys Town, two things kind of put me on that course. One, when I went to live with my natural family, I had a cousin named Alonzo Scooter Powell, and he played with a band called Threatening Weather. And Threatening Weather was the best band around here during that time frame, and I became the manager of the band. And so during that time, there was a period of 2 years where about 5 musicians were killed in various bands and various groups. And, you know, each of them kind of came to me in a troubleshooter type of way. And it heightened the sensitivity to violence in the music community. So that was the one side. The other side was after I came back from Boys Town, I joined the Social Action Committee of 20, SAC 20. And through that organization, I learned the activism aspect of how to make the community better. And so I kind of merged the two when the situation when Steve Harvey, who was killed November 5th, 1980, up at the Liberty Memorial, when the killer, Raymond Bledsoe, was acquitted
Despite the eyewitness testimony of,
there was eyewitness. Well, there was eyewitness testimony
of the two people who were with him,
right,
who testified against him. The two
right.
people who joined him in the beating of Steve Harvey, and
right.
they testified against him, and he still got acquitted.
Right. They testified against him, and an all-white jury acquitted him, even though he had came back from a party. This was the night of Ronald Reagan's election. And so people were speculating what type of party was going on. So he came back from the party with blood all over him. And so that was that side of it. But what happened at the park itself was Steve would go to the park and in public, and he would play his horn. He wasn't gay, but there were gays that hung out at the park. And he played, and you would see sometime in the newspaper that they would show pictures of Steve playing at other parks. And so at the time Steve went there, he was preparing to leave, and that there was one guy who was in the women's restroom, and then there was a guy in the men's restroom. I mean, Steve was in the men's restroom, and Bledsoe attacked one of them, the white guy who was gay,
white gay man,
with a dowel rod like you have in the closet to hang your clothes on. And he hit him, and he was able to just leave and ran off, and Bledsoe didn't chase him. Then he went and got a baseball bat and came back, and he hit Steve. Steve got up and ran, and he chased him, and then he killed him, kept beating him until he died. It was a very, very tragic moment, and the two other accomplices, when they testified, they said that the last words that Steve was saying was, "You can't do this to me, I'm a musician." And a lot of people over the years thought that, well, my involvement was more so from the standpoint of it was civil rights, or it was a federal law, it was that. It wasn't. I've had music and entertainment around my whole life. I cherish music and musicians, and I couldn't stand to think that somebody would kill some musician and then think that they could get away with it. So I wasn't trying to send a message that, well, if you violate 18-245, we're going to come and get you. The message I was trying to send was, just when you're getting ready to think you're going to hit somebody else, you pause and say, no, it might be a musician, and they don't give up on them. So that's what it was for me.
You said at the time you're going to kill one of the songbirds and then walk out
and get away. I mean, and that was it. Because in the other murders that were going on at the time of the musician, matter of fact, I was working on one in Kansas at the same time, just as the trial was going on in Steve's case, the state case, and then Bledsoe got acquitted. And it was like, no. The other ones, we hadn't even seen the results. But you're going to kill one of our songbirds? See, Steve was not just anybody. Steve was a great musician. He was going to go far. He was not just somebody that when they die, you make them into something that they're not or anything. He was going to go far. If Steve had lived today, we would be talking about Steve as a musician around the world. And for him to take that away, no, that just wasn't going to go.
And so, Alvin, you did what is now kind of famous to those of us who know you. You made a phone call. You made a phone call after that. You were going to do something about it. You made a phone call. You called the U.S. Justice Department?
Right. What happened was that once there was an acquittal, on the state level, you can't, once there's been tried for murder, you can't, just double jeopardy prevent you from being able to do try them again. And I remember looking at the TV that night when the reporter was on there saying, well, there's nothing can be done about this. And I remember looking at the TV and saying, that's what you think. Because I already knew through my relationship with the Justice Department for so many years. See, I started dealing with the Justice Department when I was 18. When I was 18 years old and over in Kansas City, Kansas, it was a desegregation of the schools, and they were trying to close Sumner at the time in Northeast, and they had a lawsuit, and I met Donald Berger, who became for 30-some years my partner in justice. He worked at the Justice Department as a mediator. So by developing with him over the years, when it came time to make the call, I already had a number in my head. I didn't have to, look anything up. I just called Washington. Well, when I called initially, we found out years later an intern had answered, and she had said, at first, she said, well, there's nothing we can do about this because murder is not a federal offense except under certain circumstances, and since neither of these, the victim or the perpetrator, was government officials, there's nothing we can do. Don Berger, which you'll never hear me say his name too much, but Don Berger was at the office. I remember after hanging up with the woman, and I went to his office and I said, hey Don, they said there ain't nothing we could do. And there's kids here, so the version was bull, and you know what the rest was. And he said, no. He said out in Salt Lake, Utah, and there were two joggers that were being killed at Liberty Park, and that the feds were investigating it right then. And you might remember earlier this month, here in Missouri, they executed Joseph Paul Franklin, and he was the racist that was out there at that time. So once she said he couldn't do anything, and he said that.
So I just want to interrupt for 1 second and say, someone told you, somebody at the Justice Department, this intern, told you no.
No.
Now, Alvin and I have had a conversation about what no means to him. I said in my little introduction, no, he takes a no as a challenge, and you said no. You said no to me, that when they say no to you, you take it as an inspiration?
No, it depends, see, because I'm in pursuit of truth. And so if no is the right answer, then that's what I settle on. I mean, so just because somebody says no doesn't motivate me to try and prove them wrong, because no might be right. I just go for what the truth is, in whichever way that goes. So then once he said that, then me and Steve Harvey's widow came down to the library and spent all day. I knew the statute was here, but just didn't know where it was, and it was at the old library. And
12th and McGee.
We went through, looking through the books, and finally got to the point about 10 minutes before closing time where it said, basically, and we don't have enough time to go through the legal nuances, but basically it was saying no. Under certain laws, whether it's a government official or not, if you deprive someone of the use of a public facility because of their race, and that's a federal offense. And Liberty Park, Penn Valley Park, was a subdivision of the government, so therefore that's what provided them the nexus to be able to go forward.
And Alvin, we've got here the Title 18 Crimes and Procedures of the United States Code annotated. And you know, old-fashioned crusaders had swords and cannons and things like that, but this is your tool.
Yeah.
A book from the Kansas City Public Library. David's slingshot, if you will, against the Goliath of injustice.
Yes. And so that, once I seen the statute, I then went back and called the Justice Department and told the woman who turned out to be the same one that, hey, this book says, the law says it don't have to be a government official. Now show me justice. And she said, this is too heavy for me. You got to talk to my supervisor. The rest was history, because once Richard Roberts got on the phone, who was the attorney at the time, and he listened to me talk about it, he said, he cut me off and said, send me everything you got. We may be able to do something because it happened in the park. And then after that, the rest was history.
And it should be said, Richard Roberts, who was then a trial attorney in the Justice Department, became the chief judge of the D.C. District Federal District Court. Right. An important
and my longtime mentor.
Right. So he also said later on in Alvin's story, I quote Judge Roberts, Chief Judge Roberts, "I had not met anybody like Alvin Sykes." And ultimately, so Bledsoe was convicted by
yes,
in
he
federal
was
court.
convicted under the section that he was convicted at the time. It was only the 4th successful prosecution in the country under the Civil Rights Act of 1968, and now he serves as the longest serving inmate in the United States, serving an original sentence for a civil rights violation. Now he was denied a few months ago for 30 years. He's still here.
Still in jail. Alvin, there's another interesting aspect of this story because this is a civil rights prosecution. In one way, you're making it sound easy, but it wasn't easy at all because you have to, in order to do this, you have to show that there is a public interest in this violation of civil rights. And to show public interest, you had to get people to sign a petition. Was one of the ways to do it.
Right. And that part was easy because Steve Harvey was so great. So everybody was ready here in Kansas City to do something about it. They just wanted direction. And so we got a petition to circulate the petition, and the musicians in town circulated the petition, the civil rights groups, the ad hoc group, the NAACP, various groups started circulating, the Ministers Union, all started circulating the petition. And because one of the things about this federal law is you could have all the evidence and you could even have the jurisdiction, but because it has that extra plug, you got to be able to show that there's public interest and that this action is necessary to achieve substantial justice. So that's when we collected the 7,000 signatures and we went to Washington with Steve Harvey's mother and Ted Reynolds from SAC 20 and myself. And we went to Washington and delivered the petitions, and then they went forward with the investigation. The way they was already conducting it, but they added it to it.
And Alvin, one of the lessons of this, and in one way this is not the most meritorious part of the story, but it's also a lesson that you keep after these things because things change over time. Bledsoe's girlfriend.
You're good.
Thank you. And we didn't even rehearse this part.
Yeah.
And Bledsoe's girlfriend changed her testimony because Bledsoe left her for her mother.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she decided she'd tell the truth and put him in jail.
What happened was, and that works in our favor a lot of times. And when we get to the cold cases, you'll see that resurface. A lot of times when folks commit these crimes, they figure they done got away with it, so they get sloppy. So Bledsoe, after he was acquitted, he then started bragging to his girlfriend and his friends that he'd killed a nigger queer and got away with it. And he moved in with the girlfriend and the girlfriend's mother. And then at some point, the Bledsoe dropped her and took on the mother. And the mother then told the daughter, because she was all upset, and said, told her, if you don't leave him alone, I'm gonna put you in a group home. She put her in a group home, and you know that old thing about a woman scoring. She told the counselors, hey, he told me he did this, and just spilled the beans to the counselor. The counselor called the county called the feds, and then it rolled from there. And then what happened, then the feds said, okay, well, if he bragged about to her, he may have bragged about his other friends. So they went up and just rounded up all his friends that they could find, found out that he had been engaging in racial type games called bricks, where you would ride in parts of the community and throw bricks at a black person, and if you missed them, you had to get off the truck and get back the best way you could, and they did this. So by the time it got to federal court, the feds brought on 30 witnesses, including the original gay white guy who got attacked in the other restroom, where in the state trial they only had 6 that they put on, and that was what they were able to use to convict him.
And you know, so a successful prosecution, and you know, with the lesson never give up, But also you changed out of this because of the white jury, the all-white jury, and the way it was selected in Missouri. Only Missouri and Mississippi had the rule that
21.
you had to be 21,
Right.
and they selected from a very narrow group of people, so it was an all-white over 21 jury,
Right.
and you took that on and changed the law.
At the time of when this happened, in Missouri you could only be on the jury if you was 21 and a registered voter, and that was the only way. And I remember a lot of people when initially after the acquittal, people were upset. People were saying that the jury was racist and that they bought an all-white jury to hear the case. And I told them, no, in Jackson County, you get an all-white jury for free because if you are a registered voter or 21, would you get on the jury? So there had been an effort just in between the killing and the acquittal where they were going to change the law to add on other public records and lower the age to 18, but other public records. And the governor had just vetoed the bill because he said it didn't apply to, that it would put an extra burden on small counties that couldn't afford computers to keep that kind of data. So he wiped it out. Well, then what we felt was we got to change that. So we had a very good representative by the name of State Representative Mary Groves Bland. And we got with Mary, and she said, you know what, we can do this. And the way you do this is you just introduce it by population rate so that it only applies to certain counties of a certain population rate, and therefore it wouldn't affect anybody else. And then after she did that, and we were getting it to move forward, she said, now when you want to really get things done, you got to attach these bills to other bills to get them through. You know, a lot of these bills, you can't get them just on their surface. So there was a judge's pay raise bill coming through.
Went right through. Right through.
And Mary said, that's where we're going.
Yeah.
And we attached the bill onto it, and it went straight on through. And me and Mary, and I'm going to introduce the third person, John Taylor, that got right over there with the hat on. We drove up to Jeff City, we got to be with the governor when he signed the bill, and what it basically did is it expanded the pool to include people with driver's license and state IDs, and
right.
It's been that way
ever since. So one case, one passionate man, and another songbird, Senator Bland, who's a great singer, and John Taylor, became Senator Bland, state rep, but then eventually she became a senator. Changed the state law and the way we conduct ourselves. You can't have an all-white jury anymore in Jackson County.
Well, you still can, but it doesn't.
Well, very unlikely,
right,
and not in a case like this.
Right.
Not in a case like this, because you'd run the risk. And change national law. So if you read the U.S. Code today, this civil rights law, the first citation is the Bledsoe case. So Alvin, you're born July 21st in 1956 to an unmarried teenage mom, and you don't actually ever get to know her in your childhood, in your early childhood, because you're given away.
Yeah.
To your story is an interesting. Tell us a little bit about Bernetta Page, your second mom.
Bernetta Fitzgerald Page was the greatest mom in the world. She was a 48-year-old woman who went and worked every day cleaning white people's homes, who at the age of 48 took on a boy at 8 days old and had already took on a daughter who wasn't hers and was raising it as a single woman. Now, she was incredible. And one of the most important things, and that's why when he first approached me about this, I said, this is really a tribute to Bernetta Page, because what she did was she instilled in me the love of reading. She made it fun. She let me know that if you can read, you can do just about anything. And it's that love of reading that makes a difference, because otherwise, if I didn't love the library, love reading, then being in the library could be a burden in terms of researching. But because she instilled this in me, it was a labor of love. And so she raised me, and she raised my sister Edna, and then when the riots occurred here in Kansas City, at the time, I couldn't, I was looking around and things in the community, but I guess I'd have to say before that to kind of get to it. She had told me, one of the things that she had told me was to not go across the street, that these people across the street were bad people. But to me, they had candy. That outweighed it on me. And so I went, and when she was at work, I would go across the street, and for 2 or 3 weeks, they were fine. It was a man and woman, and they would just give me candy, and they would be all right. Then the day came when they just stopped giving the candy. And I couldn't understand why, and I couldn't understand the attitude. And then the next day that I came back, they attacked me. And the man and the woman, and I couldn't fathom what to do, because I didn't think I could go and tell Mama. She had said don't be over there in the first place, and the police seemed so far away in terms of how to reach, even though there was a father of a black policeman, Warren, Alvin might know, I can't remember his first name, Clarence, right, and so after the first attack, I said I couldn't know where to go, so then I decided, well, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna deal with this myself and find out. And when I went back, the same thing happened again. So I realized that this wasn't the right decision in terms to be making. At that point, I was like, well, because I'd been sick as a child and had not felt that I was really going to live a long life, I always tried to squeeze my whole life in a short period of time. And so when this happened, then I realized that there needed to be people in the community in between law enforcement and the victims that can
watch out for
help
children,
connect them.
for everybody. I mean, you had not only did you have the sexual abuse from these neighbors, but you had epilepsy. Right. Spent a lot of time at Children's Mercy. Yeah. Your adopted mama, Bernetta, had to take out a mortgage on the house to be able to pay your bills at Children's Mercy, and got you a piano and a trombone and a trumpet. Mm-hmm. So you have this. It seems to me this big kind of opposite sides of the good and the bad, the light and the dark of human nature and life. Your mother gives you everything. There's people across the street who don't. Mm-hmm. You end up in Boys Town. Yeah. But you're always looking to help other people. You're always looking to do the right thing, even though you said at one point, Monroe quotes you as saying that you found your sister eventually told you that you were adopted.
Well, here's how that went, and I have to tread lightly because I don't want to put too much out about her business and her side. So I hope you understand that. But I'll say that in a conversation that we were having, she said some things that made me to think that, well, we were really may not be brothers and sisters, and I couldn't, understand what she was alluding to. And so I went and asked Mama, and I said, what's she talking about? And so at that point, that's when she first told me about my natural mother, Patricia Sykes, and said that she was 13 years old and she had me when she was 14, and was telling me that whole experience. And it wasn't until years later, and that's a point that's important. For many years, I thought that Edna was talking about me, and that I wasn't. And then I found out years later, no, she was talking about herself, and she wasn't looking that I wasn't. She wasn't a natural, Miss Page's natural daughter, and that's who she was referencing when she said it. And so the incident with the riots come into play, because then that's what led to me going to Boys Town. And when I was in Boys Town, before I went to Boys Town, when the riots occurred, I couldn't understand why the black community was tearing down and setting fires in the black community behind a man who had devoted his life to peace. And then too, I couldn't understand it. Well, if it was a white man that killed him, why aren't you out burning down the white community and not our own? This was 11-year-olds, thinking. And so I couldn't stand it, what was going on. So I'd ride around my bicycle and I'd turn in the folks that were setting the fires. And that was my first level of community activism there.
Which wasn't, like a lot of things you've done, Alvin, wasn't that popular with everybody.
You took my line. I was getting ready to say that. They may have applauded, but back then they thought it was snitching. Right. And so I'd be out on patrol, and one day I was riding my little bike, and you know how you have them barbed wire fence, not barbed wire, but a fence and this cross at the top, and they grabbed behind the bike and just pushed me on through it, just kept control of it and pushed me on through it. And it tore across my chest and under my arm. And I remember I went home and I was more concerned that my shirt and stuff was all messed up and Mom was gonna be mad. And I walked in and then Edna started screaming. And I was, well, what the hell's wrong with her? And then she was looking at me, so then I looked at me and and then I started screaming. And it cut off, and then, I went she took me to the hospital. Well, after that, it became apparent that this wasn't going to stop in terms of the attack. So it was during this period that Mama, she was Catholic and had that hookup in terms of Boys Town, and for my safety and her safety in the family, among other reasons, she decided to get me into Boys Town, and that's when I went to Boys Town.
And wrestled with Jose, but also joined the choir.
The choir, see, I remember the choir.
Yeah, you remember the choir, you don't remember wrestling with Jose.
Yes.
And you come out of Boys Town, and your interest in music is important. You're going to the library and reading about music and reading Billboard and that sort of thing, and charming the librarians, which he still does. But you encounter Herbie Hancock, Herbie who sent a message tonight.
Yes, yeah. And so, like I said, I was with the band, Threatening Weather, and so we were used to going around and meeting different musicians and that type of thing. And so one time Herbie was playing at the Landmark up at Union Station. And I had like a play sister, and she was a musician, and she was real pretty. So when she wanted to go out and not be bothered by nobody, she'd take me along the block, and as long as she was buying the drinks, I was cool. And so she went and said, hey, first she said Herbie Mann's playing up there. And I went with her to Herbie Mann. And then that he was all right. Then a few weeks later, she said, well, I want to go back down. Herbie Hancock's playing there. Well, at least I'd heard of Herbie Hancock. And so I said, okay. So when we went to try and go backstage before the concert, before he was playing. And got back there, and the door was locked, and here was this noise going on. It was, I'm like, what's that noise he's making? And at first I thought, well, we're at a Union Station, so maybe it's an auction or something, going on. So then he went on and played the concert, and all during the time, I don't even remember the music he was playing. That wasn't even in me. All I want to know is what was that noise he was back there making? So afterwards, I walked up to him and I said, hey, Herbie, what was that noise you was back there making? And he said, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. I said, what? And he said, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, I'm a Buddhist. And I said, oh, okay. And he started talking about human revolution and how you can transform yourself from inside and out, and, you know, and from wherever you're at. And, you know, me being an activist, you talk about revolution, that don't scare me. So, okay, human revolution, that's cool. And so then I went to his room, the hotel. He said, oh, you want to come? I'll tell you more about it. And so I came to his hotel, and he would talk to me about, you know, if you have goals in your life, or you know, everybody has a mission in life. It's everybody. There ain't nobody that don't have a story. There ain't nobody that don't have a mission. And the way that you become absolutely happy is, in terms from our perspective, chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, was that if you turn within and you reach out toward world peace, or becoming happy in a sense, not a absolute type of happiness, and it's not a relative type of happiness, but a happiness that comes that can't nobody take away from you accomplishing your goal. He said, when we get that way across the world, we'll have world peace. So I was like, wow, that's what I want to be. So I then started this relationship with him. And over the years, I developed with him in terms of it. I mean, he didn't just introduce me and then go on to the next city and forget about me. He is my best friend in the world. And we have been in contact for 40 years. And during the course of this year, I'll be bringing him here to Kansas City so we can commemorate the 40th year of us meeting together. And if you...
And so you get into some activities that, you know, don't necessarily strike one as being essentially Buddhist in the civil rights fights, but maybe they are, because the core of your inner belief. But I want people to know. I want you to tell us a little bit about before we get to the Till case, your testimony for William Bradford Reynolds, because this is so odd for someone who's known as a civil rights, a key civil rights leader in the United States. So in the Reagan administration, they appoint a guy named William Bradford Reynolds, who'd been head of the Civil Rights Division, who was against affirmative action. So he gets a nomination by the president to be the #3 guy in the Justice Department. And the entire civil rights community is against this, because he's against affirmative action. Makes some sense, right? Mm-hmm. And our friend Alvin actually reads up on what William Bradford Reynolds had done in the Civil Rights Division, and you found that he in fact had done a better job in terms of prosecuting civil rights cases than some previous folks.
Well, I didn't have to read about it on the first tip, because the first case that William Bradford Reynolds did when he got into office was United States of America versus Raymond Bledsoe. That was his first case, so that got my attention. Steve Harvey's case was his first case. So when, and then two, the challenge of truth. I'm going to stick with truth no matter what, and I'm not afraid of the truth. So when the issue of his nomination came up, I did research his record, and I researched the previous records. From the standpoint of criminal civil rights enforcement, not the other area, which was the civil side, but from the criminal civil rights record, his division had one of the most highest successful prosecution in number of cases, number of perpetrators convicted, and went to jail. So my thing about going to Congress and testifying at this hearing was, first off, I wasn't testifying for his support for his nomination. You know, if you look at the language in the congressional record, I didn't say I support him to get promoted. What I said was, he had the best criminal civil rights enforcement record, and you should consider that along with the other things that you see bad about him in your total decision about it. And that had he had the worst record you would have had that at the top, saying he wasn't good for that. And I said, so that's what I went for.
You were
because I'm not
testifying
scared
to
of
the truth. You were testifying to the truth. You wanted the truth.
And then there was another part of it was strategy. Because in terms of me, I cannot afford to let any Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights or Attorney General that comes in get a pass based on because they're from different administration. If they come in on an administration, Republican administration, I hold them accountable. If they come in on a Democrat, I hold them accountable. So in order to do that, you got to maintain certain relationships. And what I seen was this, from the practical standpoint. He was doing what the president and the attorney general wanted him to do, that was nominating him to the office. He was doing that. If they went forth and did not confirm him, then he would go back to being what he was that they were mad at him about in the first place, only now he would be pissed and have an extra chip on the shoulder. So that, I said, y'all need to take both of those things, into consideration.
Well, and the people on the other side think you're independent and you're interested in the truth. They'll listen to you.
Yeah.
And there's another case that came along, and you wanted the Justice Department to take a look at it. You called up the then Attorney General of the United States, Ed Meese, and at first they said, well, it's hard to get an appointment with the Attorney General. And you said, well, he might want to talk to the only black man who testified for William Bradford Reynolds.
And he did.
And he did.
And what it was, and I remember a lot of civil rights leaders were really upset about what I was doing at the time, but then there was one who wasn't, and that was Reverend Mac Charles Jones. I don't know how many. Mac Charles Jones picked me up one day, and it was in the midst of why everybody was upset. And he said, well, Alvin, I'm gonna wait and see first what you can get for doing this before I say whether it was a good move. So in the first 90 days after testifying, there was a 14-year-old in Kansas City, Kansas by the name of Antoine Weatherspoon, and I won't give the whole story, but basically it appeared that he had been killed by a son of a police officer, and there had been 2 autopsies done, and the second autopsy was that the family did for it. They had said it was accidental, the first one, and the second one the family hired to try and see if the first one wasn't any good. And so there was a crook out there who was raising money and everything for the second autopsy. They didn't, finally they did get no, take that back. They did the second autopsy, and it came back and said the same thing that the county was doing. So they wanted a third autopsy, and that's where this crook came in and was raising money, and ultimately he didn't put it toward it. Well, then at that time I did 2 things. One, reach out to Richard Roberts, the attorney. He was always my mentor since Steve Harvey's case, and he usually could always lead me in the right direction. And he said that when we needed autopsies done or pathological work done at the Justice Department, we'd get the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. And so I took him, got with the mother and said, okay, here, you need to write a letter to the Attorney General, and you say you want your son to be, body to be exhumed and to be examined by the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. And so she wrote the letter. I then got with Senator Doe, but time was getting, and he was helping, but time was getting away. So I've always had access to the Attorney General over the years, but I don't always pull that chip. It has to be something worth doing that for. So at this point, I felt that we need to do it because the body's deteriorating, and so we need to do it. So I called to Attorney General Ed Meese's office, and that's when the guy said, well, he only meets with heads of states. He's got all these other things that he do. And so I don't think we can do this. And that's when I said, well, just tell him that it's Alvin Sykes, the only black man in America who testified at William Bradford Reynolds hearing. So he went and put it on pause, and then it was about three or 4 minutes, and he came back and got up and said, now, how long are you going to be here? And I said, until somebody gives me the right answer. He got off the phone then and got back on 2 minutes later and said, well, the Attorney General can meet you this date. And that was too quick for me to be able to get to Washington. So I said, well, that's too quick. And then they turned around and gave me another day. So I go to Washington, and when we get there, his assistant tried to talk me into, well, can you do it just by looking at the records and all like that, the autopsy? And he spent 45 minutes trying to say, can you just do that? And I said, no. And then we go in and meet with just me, him, and Ed Meese. And I said my little spiel, and the guy tried to say about doing the review by paper, and Ed Meese said, nah, we ain't gonna find that much doing it that way. And plus, we want to show the support. So we're gonna do this in terms of this autopsy. And the assistant went out of the room with me, and he called over to the Community Relations Service, because even though you're the Attorney General of the United States, there has to be some jurisdictional basis for you to be able to do something in terms of the Justice Department and its resources. So he said this is a community relations issue, so he was going to do it through the Community Relations Service. And the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology then came in, exhumed the body, did an autopsy, the third autopsy. They said that the first two autopsies were inadequately done, and that they could not have come to a conclusion of murder, but because of the deterioration of the bodies in the passage of time, we can't tell either. So then they moved it to change it, well, they gave their official one as being undetermined, and it would take too long to talk about the rest, but it was that action.
You didn't get a definitive result with somebody convicted, but like a lot of the cold case civil rights issues, simply shining a bright light on it, getting the right people to shine a light on it, you change people's views of how things should be done, about how the law should be used or manipulated.
Well, not in Antoine Weatherspoon's case, because it's still open. So, and right. I've learned through dealing with civil rights cases, in the unsolved civil rights era cases, we'll wait, so it's still time now. And,
never give up.
And if it comes forth, we will pursue it.
So, I want to get to the Till case now, but I do want to mention one other thing that's an example of your valuing the truth and valuing the law and the way the law should be used over any particular outcome. The Ku Klux Klan at one point, early in the days of public access channels, wanted to get on the public access channel. And Alvin actually supported their request, because you said, you got a great phrase that Monroe quotes in the monograph, let them get into the boxing ring of ideas.
So we can knock them out.
We can knock them out. And it's basically Alvin echoing John Stuart Mill, who said the truth emerges from the clash of ideas, and it sure did in that case. You did knock them out, and they lasted only one episode on. And
just touch that briefly, because that was very emotional. People were not understanding. They were trying to shut down the station for everybody. And at the time, the majority of the people that used public access in terms of training to learn how to do cameras and all like that were black and poor people. So they were going to shut down the station that was used for them to keep the Klan from being able to use it. Well, one thing, we had good intelligence, so we knew that these guys wasn't Klansmen, they were wannabes. And they didn't have the discipline that it would take to go through the training and maintain a show. So we said, no, you don't sit up, they don't want to get off of they don't want to get on the TV, they want to get somebody to oppose them getting on the TV. And they went and got all the national, international publicity from them being, from it being exposed and pushed for them against the station. So then, ultimately, what we filed was called an amicus brief, and that's when other victims, it's not necessarily in support of the Klan, It's whenever you have a legal action that the results of that legal action will affect other people. Those other people can then file what's called a friend of the court brief and outline how it's affecting them. And that's what we filed in support, an amicus brief in that matter, because the ACLU was the one that was actually defending them for their rights. And so when they finally, the city lost, the guys got on the show, and they came on one time. And they only wrote it for 15 minutes, and it was a 30-minute show. So the guy, after he did it once, he had to turn around and start to read it all over again. And then he never showed up, again. So that was.
Anyway, defense of freedom of speech, particularly when you know that your opponent's freedom of speech will deep six them. Mm-hmm. So the Emmett Till case in 1955, which I always remind myself and anybody, a lot of the people in this audience, is my lifetime and your lifetime. Emmett Till, lynched, murdered. I mean, it's as brutal a murder as you want to find in the annals of this kind of thing. So his mother insisted that when he had his funeral, be an open casket so people would know, and an extraordinary moment. And as it turned out, Steve Harvey's wife
Steve Harvey's
was a cousin.
widow and her family tree were related to Emmett Till. And when we were doing Steve's case, I remember her saying, this is the second hate crime in our family. And so years went by, and then one day I picked up the Kansas City Call, and it was an article talking about that there was movies and books being made on Emmett Till, and was talking in there about Emmett Till's mother had been trying to get the case open since 1956, and that these filmmakers felt that they had evidence that would show that there were other people other than the two that were initially involved and convicted, that that they had evidence. So when I look at a case, I don't take on just any case. I mean, it can be an injustice, but first I gotta feel that I can make a difference. If I can't make a difference, then it doesn't do any good for me being in it. By the time I read the article the second time, I said, I can do this. So I then, the next day, just got information. I was over at Mary Ann Flunder's house over in Kansas. She's an elected official, and I called
Mrs. Till?
Mr. Mobley's number, and then that was in the phone book, and then I called Wheeler Parker and left a message. And so I talked to her, and that moment I'll never forget. I was there at Mary Ann's by myself and stuff, because she had been helping me, let me stay there for a while, and looking at the TV. And then when I was talking to the mother, at first she would not acknowledge that she was Emmett Till's mother. She just started talking business. You know, what would you do if this, or if it was this? And she just kept talking in this sense. And then I started feeling she was talking more and more and more, and feeling more looser. And so finally, it was about 10 seconds before she finally said, "My son," that I realized that I was talking to Emmett Till's mother. And so Don Berger and I, after I talked to her, we were going to go to Detroit, because there was a wedding. We were in the National Association of Human Rights Workers, and there were members getting married, and we were going to that, and we said, well, we're going to drive over to Chicago and meet with Miss Mobley. And so when we got over there, we met with her. She was in the house, had her shoes kicked off. She was just in the kitchen, baking the cake. She was just really jolly, and she started talking. And then, like she had been doing so many times since 1955, she started telling the story of what happened to her son. And so when we talked to her, we told her about what we had done with Steve Harvey's case, and that I had already been in contact with the Attorney General's office, and that I felt that we would get some movement toward getting this reopened. I remember we mentioned a couple of names of senators, Trent Lott And they start laughing, oh, you're going to get Trent locked and stuff. And I said, well, we're going to get this through in terms of reopening. And I told her, I said, from what I know right now, I can guarantee you that there'll be an investigation. But I can't guarantee you that there'll be a prosecution. There's too many variables that can be in the way in terms of that. And two, I come into this with no preconceived notions. So you're going to have to understand that first. And it doesn't matter to me that this is the biggest known case in the world. I'm going to do it like I do all my cases, and I have no preconceived notions of what is right and what is wrong with it. We're going to pursue the truth, and wherever the trail leads, that's where we're going to go. She said, that's what I want, and that's what we, in terms, did. So then she, during the days in between, we were working with her blessing to set up the Emmett Till Justice Campaign, and she was going to be the first chairman, and I was going to be the coordinator. Don Berger was secretary, and Keith Beauchamp, one of the filmmakers, was vice president, and that we would work to get this reopened. And then on the seventh day, just when we had just arranged the conversation with the state attorney general for her, that same day, she passed. And I remember we were sitting there, we were waiting for her to get on the phone, to call me to get back, and we had set it up. And then finally Keith called in the evening and said, she's gone, and she had passed. So she lived long enough to pass the torch. And we said we were going to take it across the finish line. The torch is
passed to you and to Simeon Wright, his cousin,
right,
who we had here in the library, has been very important to this, who was with him that night,
right,
who was with Emmett Till that night. And the documentaries were made, 2 documentaries were shown, and you went to, with Simeon Wright and with others, to Senator Talent and Senator Dodd, and got the Emmett Till bill that became the Emmett Till law passed.
Let me correct that a little bit. What happened was, while the investigation was going on into Emmett Till's case, Senator Schumer and Senator Talent had introduced a non-binding resolution calling for the feds to speed up the criminal investigation. And they were citing the fact that age and all these other factors, and they wanted to speed it up. And so when I seen the resolution, I got upset, and I said, well, wait a minute. If Congress sits up and demands that the Justice Department speed up a criminal investigation, and then somebody gets convicted or charged after that, any defense attorney worth his salt will say it was a rush to judgment because the government pressed us, the Congress pressed us to move forward. And if they took their time, they'd have got the right guy. So I told Senator Talent then, I said, so to do that would, at best, it would be symbolism, because it's not going to have an impact on the pace of it. And I'm following the case, their investigation every day. They are moving as they can move. I said, but at worst, it could interfere with the investigation. But I told them, so if you want to do something to really get past symbolism, there's all these unsolved cases, I said, that I seen when I went down in Mississippi and Tennessee and Alabama, that didn't have the names of Emmett Till or the 3 civil rights workers or, the famous names. This Johnny leaves in the middle of the night and nobody ever sees him again. And I said, and I can't form no blank justice campaign for all of these cases out there. So if you want to do something, you need to create a unit in the Justice Department and give us the funding, to focus on investigating as many cases as they can find, that there are people still alive, and if you can find any of them alive and you can find the evidence for them, to prosecute it. And so he said, you're right. And so Senator Talent said that, and he signed one of his workers to staff people to work with me, and I helped draft the legislation and the parts that need to go into to it, and that led to ultimately, over a series of years, to the passage of the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights.
One particular part of it I think is interesting and maybe indicative of the way Alvin works. It passed the House 422 to 2. and, and it was going to have a similar vote in the Senate, except it got held up by one man, by Tom Coburn, the senator from Oklahoma, because it wasn't funded. And they had a rule in the Senate at that point that you had to make sure that it was funded. And so from a matter of principle, there were a lot of people who were angry at him, but you understood that he was acting from principle.
Well, what it was, yeah, first I looked to see what was his reasoning. But this was very, very much a spiritual victory for me, because in Buddhism we believe very much in the power of dialogue. So when I started looking and seeing that they weren't talking to each other, but having press conference challenging each other, I said, well, no, let me reach out to him. But before I reached out to him, in the backstory of it was when we first got the bill introduced. One of this reporter, I remember down in Mississippi, was saying, this bill should fly through. This is not going to be no problem. Who's going to be opposed to this? And everything. And I said, well, I don't think so. I don't think it's going to just go through. And he said, well, why not? And I said, well, because we're in America. And here, well, I did. I said, in here in America, you're talking about unanimous consent. When it comes to blacks and civil rights, we ain't never had unanimous consent. We've always just had to fight and fight and fight until it was time to win. I said, so there's got to be a Bull O'Connor, that's when we would know we're going. So when the vote came down 422 to 2 when I was here, and for a minute, I started thinking, you know what, because the paper was saying, oh, it's going to pass the next day, and it's swift to the Senate. I was going to say, well, you know what, maybe it is going to do it. And the next day,
Senator Coburn
puts a hold on the bill. I said, now it's going to pass. That's our Bull O'Connor. And so then that's when I reached out to him, ultimately reached out to him, and I knew he wanted it funded. He wasn't against the issue. And we wanted it funded. So by talking to him and expressing to him where we were at and treating him from a human standpoint and trying to tell him that, hey, it's your method, it's not your goal, that's the problem. Then he started talking and unfolding to me. But see, what he really didn't know and what I knew was I was chanting every day for him. And I just knew that ultimately this was going to be a victory, and it was going to be a spiritual victory. And so I talked to him and everything, and he started finding out more about me. And then ultimately, he grabbed onto us so much that he turned into a champion of the bill.
And Alvin, here's what Tom Coburn said when they passed the bill. Here's what Tom Coburn said on the floor of the United States Senate. I want to tell you something about America with this bill, and it has to do with Alvin Sykes. If you met him, you would immediately fall in love with him. He is poor as a church mouse. He has led this group with integrity. He has been an honest broker. He has not played the first political game with anybody in Washington. As a matter of fact, he had games played on him, and he's been manipulated. But the fact is, he's held true to his belief and his commitment to the mother of Emmett Till. And because of that, we are going to see this bill come to fruition. Now, we've been at this a long time, Alvin, so I'm gonna get to the end, and we'll ask for a couple of questions too. Leave time for a couple of questions. And I know you're working on a lot of things. You've worked on the Leon Jordan case, and you're working on Voting Rights Act stuff, and we can talk about that in the question and answer session. But I do want to say one thing to wrap this up and then get to a couple of questions. You can't have justice without truth, and you can't have truth without knowledge. That's part of the importance of the library in this story that I hope I've made clear, and that Alvin certainly makes clear when he talks about it. But justice and truth which are two Aristotelian virtues. There's a third virtue that you have to have, without which justice and truth are just concepts. And it's the Aristotelian virtue of courage. And it's the courage and passion that Alvin Sykes has that is a lesson to all of us, that is a virtue that has changed the world that we live in Kansas City for the better, the world that people in Missouri live in, and Kansas, and that the United States of America lives in. And we owe a debt of gratitude to this man. We have a microphone right here if there are some questions, and we've gone on a long time, so we'll take a few questions. Right.
Senator Hardy from Wyandotte County is here and wants to make a statement.
Okay. Yeah. Senator?
Yeah.
Senator Haley, would you like to make a statement?
Where's Senator Haley? All right. Yes.
Alvin, I have one question for you. Because I've seen all the cases and I read about them, I researched about them, but some of the people that got caught, like the bombing of the 4 little girls in the church, they caught the guy after 30 years and the guy had no remorse. How can you not have that anger in you as a man and as a human being when somebody commits an injustice and gets away with it? And even after at the age of 70, he still didn't have any remorse. And 4 little precious girls died in the church, the house of God, because of hate. And I have to carry that anger for me to try to do something about things that are going on. But is this prayer of being a Buddhist, is that what sets you apart from people like me that carry that anger?
I would say yes and no. I mean, in the sense of, we believe in turning poison into medicine. And so, from that perspective, when, yes, there's an anger that's in there. It's just channeled on it. And then you also have to kind of balance it with other things. And one of the things that I've seen in some of the trials that did occur, there were white family members turning on their brothers and testifying against them. So when we went into those types of cases, yes, you have the anger about what this person does, but then you need to play chess in order to get to them. And so we would set up and have those, and when those trials would come forth and people would speak and bring forth, there was a certain healing that came with it. And some of the reasons why we felt that it would be effective is that within the Justice Department at the time, it was a young generation. So the young generation didn't have all of the baggage of what happened back then. They weren't around then, so they could focus in on this with not having the inherent type of anger. But yes, as a Buddhist, I certainly feel that we will be able to achieve a victory over violence. I mean, because we have violence that occurs here, but we need to have a victory over it. We can't stop all the violence that occurs, but we can love one another in such a way that it diminishes it. And so we believe in a sense that if you're seeking happiness, absolute happiness in your life, then you're not going to be wanting to do the negative thing. We believe in cause and effect. It's just basic. You make a negative cause, you get a negative effect. You make a positive cause, you get a positive effect. So I would know when that old man's sitting up there, he got all that karma that's there, that's leading up to what's getting ready to happen to him, and he don't even know it. And I do. So in that sense, it's less of a obvious, I guess, the sense of anger than more so that you don't know what's getting ready to happen to you.
That's right. Senator.
How you doing, Alvin?
All right.
To be honest, I really don't have a question for you. I did want to read this resolution that I brought down from the state for you.
And Senator, you want to introduce yourself? And,
I'm sorry,
and
State
Alvin, you
No,
want-
let me
I haven't made it
introduce-
to the Senate yet.
let me introduce you.
I'm sorry, State
This
Representative
is-
Brandon Ellington.
This is one of the most outstanding young elected officials in the country. It's because of representatives like Brandon Ellington that I have more of a confidence that I can take a rest, and the older ones can take a rest in what we're doing, because he's outstanding in the way that he represents us. We should all be very proud. Go ahead.
No, thank you, and it's all praise to God. And you can't take a break yet, man. And I'm not going to read the whole resolution, but I am going to read some highlights in here. Born in July of 1956, Alvin Sykes is a self-taught human rights worker who spends countless hours in public libraries reading and researching the forgotten victims. And Alvin Sykes then uses his newfound knowledge to alter the course of human history, especially by helping to reopen civil rights cases that have gone cold. And Alvin Sykes investigated the local 1980 murder of Steve Harvey, which led to one of the first federal civil rights convictions in the country, prosecuted under the Civil Rights Act of 1968. Alvin Sykes additionally researched the case of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old black boy who was murdered in Mississippi for whistling at a white woman, and who is a namesake of Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crime Act passed by Congress. Alvin Sykes currently is working on legislation that would eliminate the statute of limitation in sexual abuse in Missouri, and I'm actually honored to be able to carry that bill for you. And again, I just want to honor.
Thank you. Where's Senator Haley?
Right there.
I know the councilman was coming up. I didn't know if the councilman. All right, Jonathan. Thank you. Thank you.
All
My
right.
brother, my friend. I just got in from Topeka, and I just wanted to come back. We did get a chance to run the letter, and I'm going to take a cue from Representative Ellington and not read the entirety, but suffice it to say that we do consider you by state, if not a national treasure, that we in Kansas are exceptionally proud of your work and all that you have brought, your decades-long preservation in creating what you like to call a justice-seeking atmosphere. Oh boy.
Yeah.
It's been both humbling and inspirational, and as is the courage, energy, and tenacity that you display in fighting for the civil and social rights of all people. You're truly a champion of great causes. This honor today is well-deserved, and I am too proud to call you a true friend and an ally.
My big little brother. Thank you very much.
That's extended not only by myself, but also State Senator David Haley of Kansas, but also State Representative Broderick T. Henderson.
Thank you, Senator. And Councilman Sharp?
Thank you, Crosby. It's just my honor to be here along with my colleague, Councilman Jim Glover, to honor Alvin and for all the work he's done. And I do want to ask him to comment a little bit about on the voting rights case that he's working on now in Wyandotte County. But he is really doing the Lord's work in trying to build a just and fair society. And some of the folks that we're dealing with are still out there. They're still deadly. And you may recall, Alvin, this Klan group that wanted to have a weekly show on our cable TV channel here. The guy that headed that was Dennis Mann,
Right.
who was the so-called Grand Wizard. He lived in Riverside. He's doing a 40-year term now in the federal pen,
Right.
because he sent a letter bomb to an African-American university official in Arizona, which blew up. And if he'd have opened it the way you might normally open a letter, it probably would have killed him. As it did, it maimed him. But he was convicted of that, and he is doing a 40-year term. And he was probably involved in the Oklahoma City bombing because Timothy McVeigh, the convicted bomber, called him the day before. They just never had enough to actually charge him with it. But there are still some deadly people out there, and it takes courage to take these people on, and Alvin has that. But I wish you would comment a little bit about the voting rights case you're working on.
In Kansas City, Kansas, in 1997, it was created a new government called the Unified Government. And I'm not going to give the long version, but the short version of it was they created a election plan. And the results of the election plan was that if you were a commissioner living in 4 of the districts in the city and you wanted to run for mayor, you were, and you ran and you lost, you were off the committee, off the commission. But in the other 4 districts, if you were a commissioner and ran for office, and you lost, you parachuted back to a 2-year term on the commission. And when they set this structure up, they didn't have it to where it would rotate. So it would always be the same 4 on the respective side. And so when we had this last election, there was an African American by the name of Nathan Barnes, who was a commissioner, had been in from the entire time of the existence of the unified government, who ran for mayor, and he lost, and he was off the commission. Then you had Ann McGee and Mark Holland, who went on in the general, and she lost, but she still had 2 years on the term, and Mark Holland became mayor, and his seat now is still vacant, has been for 10 years. Well, Terrence Maddox is a commissioner, young commissioner over there, and we were in a conversation earlier in the campaign because, full disclosure, I didn't support Nathan Barnes in the primary. I supported Ann McGee. But when he brought up this issue, my little justice antenna went up, and I said, well, hold on, let me look into that. And when I seen that it didn't rotate on it, that it would always be the same districts in the same place, and then I started looking at Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And that was intriguing. I was sitting up and it was saying, well, if you have a election procedure or process that has the result of a discriminatory impact on a protected class, that it's a violation of the Voting Rights Act. And so I started measuring everything up. Okay, well, we had a first district, that's 59% black, check off. You had a black commissioner, check off, and it always stayed that way. And then everybody who had won, including Joe Reardon, Marinovich, and Holland, they all came from districts that would jettison back a 2-year term. So that's when I then said, well, you know, we need to move forward with this. And I contacted the voting rights section of the Justice Department and started bringing to them this issue and started doing the research, knowing what they needed. There now is a review that's underway now, going on by the Justice Department. I meet with Mayor Holland tomorrow, and then next week I go to Washington and meet with the voting section because we want them to move in on this very quickly. We want to change that process so that it's equal opportunity in terms for everybody, and that since Nathan Barnes is a victim of the Voting Rights Act and there's a vacant seat for 10 months, we want him to be appointed in that seat as a means to mitigate the damages that occurred. So when I get back from Washington, I feel very good about how the Justice Department is responding and reviewing this matter. The mayor so far and some of the commissioners I've talked to have been working toward changing it for the future. The only battle that I see right now is going to be what you're going to do with that vacant seat. But we have outstanding citizens like Mary Martin, who's right here, who stood up and said, no, we're going to have to fill that seat, and I'm going to make enough noise until you do. And that has helped us in terms of helped in Washington. She collected citizens. So when you talk about what people and individuals can do, there's all kinds of people, and Mary is one of those type of people as well. And so we're looking now, and I feel very confident that we're going to get this changed and change the process so that in Wyandotte County, if you're going to lose, you're going to lose because you're lost. You're not going to lose because the system is set to make you lose and change it.
Last question.
This is not a question. It's just that I'm an old timer. I'm in Kansas City and been here all my life. And this is the first time I've been to a public meeting this time of the week and this time of the day. It's during the week and everything, and it's a mixed crowd, and I've never seen so much gray hair and I think a change is going to happen. We're going to learn finally how to live together, and that's what life is about. And we'll all be happy and live together.
And if I can say one thing in response to what he's saying, that's very important. And when this started happening about me being a resident, a scholar in residence, and being here at the library and what I did, I started looking about what more it meant, because I mean it was many years that black people couldn't even come into the library, and the thing that really pointed it out to me was me and Lebo Bohannon, one of the original SAC 20. And he was here taking pictures with me, and we were outside and we were getting ready to leave, and he had his ticket, parking ticket, and one of the black guards came up and said, do you want me to go and get your ticket stamp? And he said, yeah, but then tears started welling up in his eyes and stuff. And he said, you know, it was not too much long time ago that we couldn't even come in here, and now in 2013 we can have a guard that want to make it comfortable for us being here. And that's when I realized that me being here and this experience means a whole lot more than just learning to use the library.
Okay, one more.
One last question, Alvin. How are you funded for your trips and your travel and the things that you do?
A lot of it, over the years, there hasn't been much funding. There has been, people would contribute, people, I would struggle. Don Berger, the one that I talked about earlier, for a large part of it came from Don Berger's pocket. Don Berger was a white man who was in Iowa, and he came from a family that had a lot of money on the farm initially, and then he worked at the Justice Department. And so he was totally committed. There was nothing in terms about, he was totally committed. And he would take his salary money and use that to fund the trip. So a lot of the times that I would be able to make the trip and people would look up and see, well, hey, there's he in D.C., is because Don would be sitting up driving in his car, putting the money in and driving there. And so it's been that kind of contribution up to now. But now we want to take it to, I want to take it to another level. You know, it's going to take another way of doing it. I don't know if this is the time.
Well, I think what we can say is this: Alvin needs help in the campaign for justice. Right? The library wants to help by getting these out, not just in Kansas City, but I was in Philadelphia passing these out to a bunch of librarians over the weekend, and we want to get this going nationally. We want Alvin to speak around the country about this, and so there are various ways that you can help. And if you contact Alvin or contact me, we'll let you know how you can help and where those checks can go.